digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. We're coming at you live today from the Immersive Technology in Sports and Entertainment Innovation Summit. And I'm here with the lovely Rob Morgan, who joins us once again.
Hello.
And we have Luke here as well.
Hello.
Why don't you start by explaining a little bit more about who you are and what you do? And Luke, why don't you give us the context of exactly what you do for this summit?
Sure. So, Luke James, I'm one of the directors and company founders of the Sports Innovation Network, which is looking at how technology can be applied in a sporting context, if that's fan engagement, performance, broadcast. The purpose of this summit is there's so much happening in this immersive space that we're trying to see, it's so embryonic, especially in Europe and London, who are the touch points on the ecosystem that need to actually come together and talk and see, basically thrash it out so we can see where we are in 18 months to a year's time.
Okay, and Rob, why don't you remind our lovely listeners exactly who you are and what you do?
So I'm more from the entertainment side of all of this. I am a VR writer and consultant and an immersive experience designer, and I run Playlines, which is a London-based augmented reality studio making location-based immersive augmented reality.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, today we are going to talk all about the future of digital identity. And the reason that I think this is quite interesting in the context of you two lovely people is because we're starting to hear more and more about the use of data when it comes to digital identity in the context of social media. We're certainly hearing a lot about this right now. But there is perhaps more of a conversation to be had about the future of how data is being either utilised, accessed, or applied when it comes to individuals' identity in this digital ecosystem, as one might like to call it. So I am going to start with you, Rob, just because you've had more practice at these things, talking about these random things.
Good. That's up to 4.
I'm curious from your perspective, when we talk about the future of, say, for example, the games industry, and we already have a certain degree of understanding, there's a certain aspect of expectation for a lot of players. When they sign up to a game, they're going to create an account, there's going to be a digital identity for them in the form of an avatar, which is a projection of their self within whatever the environment of the game is. How do you see the future of that attitude towards gaming identities shifting towards real world identities? So when we look at that difference between a game avatar versus a social media identity, how do you see these things beginning to transition?
That's interesting. So in many ways, the large game companies and consoles have been trying very hard to link up a person's social media identity with their gamer identity, with mixed success, and with some people being quite open to it, some people being quite hostile to it, and in practice, the thing that's really driving that move being convenience, as with so many things, where if it's easier to sign into Xbox Live with a Facebook account, people will do that rather than creating a brand new account, which has been a successful way to do it. But in terms of what the user experience is, in terms of how they build their identity and what they value in their identity, I mean, you know me, I'm a big believer, blue sky believer in augmented reality. So I think the thing that's most interesting to talk about is that as games, in some ways and some types of games, move out into play spaces that include the real world, digital games, digitally mediated games that take place in the real world, Pokemon Go plus, then the ability to create a digital identity for yourself from a fictional place, to be a bandit or to be a space marine or whatever, is going to be available to people as they walk down the street. The ability to customize how you are displayed to other people is something that augmented reality is going to give us. Because walking down the street, experiencing things with some level of digital augmentation, one of the first things that's going to happen is that there'll be an app that allows me to look around this room and see the name of everybody floating above their head. That's a utility. But the next logical thing is personal customization. It's being able to skin your own appearance. It's going to be hats. You're going to be able to buy hats that will virtually appear on yourself as other people look at you from their augmented reality interface, whatever that is. And I think that it's going to herald a new era where even light touch, even mildly digital personal customization becomes a big part of some people's identity. I'm not saying this is how we are all going to eat our dinner off virtual plates one day. I'm saying that the ability to customize your identity in the way that we're used to in games, there is a clear appeal, and we are moving in a direction which implies that we're going to start to see that kind of customization in the real world, digitally mediated through AR.
Okay.
Just as it struck me as you were talking, the whole element of playing games in itself is semi-escaping. You're being in a different world. Whereas social media is almost how people are reflecting themselves. If it's an Instagram or a Twitter account, that's almost that's the person how they present to the world. The gaming is them actually going away from the world, sort of exploring their own sort of curiosity. So merging them makes loads of sense. It's interesting. But I always thought it's maybe our generation that came through with Facebook for the last 10 years and Twitter are a bit more cautious to marry them. But if you are coming through as a gamer now, it maybe seems more natural to just blend anyway.
Absolutely. I think that's the reason that the type of merged reality game that I'm describing isn't going to work for everybody, definitely. But it's also going to have to require a large degree of being able to dial in and out. You are going to have to be able to segment the way you appear professionally as you're walking down the street compared to your identity within a game that you might also be playing at some level, because it's one of the digital layers that you're interfacing with as you walk through the world. But I think you're right that, especially if we're talking about merged identities, there's a difference between someone whose whole social media identity supports their gaming identity as a streamer or whatever, and someone who wants to be a fan, but who doesn't want to be spotted by rival fans walking down the street and bothered about it. Not everybody wants to.
But here's an interesting thing. So I don't know if you have both watched Ready Player One or not, but there is a moment in the movie where, during the kind of explanation of this future world where everybody is now using VR and it's the norm and it's an accepted part of society, there's this one bit where he's talking about how attached people are to their identities. And he says, and when people lose their shit, they lose their shit. And it shows this guy getting killed in the game, losing all of his possessions and things in the game, ripping off his headset in anger, and then literally running for the window to throw himself out the window because he's that upset about everything that he has potentially just lost. And it leads to this interesting kind of question of, we've already seen examples of this. From a social media perspective, there was a period of time where there was a lot of suicides that were happening as a result of things that were happening on people's social media profiles. Bullying that was happening, or something that was damaging to somebody's profile, and they felt that there was nothing they could do other than to harm themselves. And we've already seen that kind of mental, psychological damage happening when it comes to social media accounts. We already know that there is a social and psychological attachment to game avatars where people do feel literally like their life has ended if something happens to their account. Somebody's account gets hacked, for example. That is more of a violation than somebody coming and burgling you for a lot of people, okay? Because you've spent maybe 10 or 20 years of your life essentially creating, cultivating and building this character, and then it's violated. People feel very personally about this stuff. And so I wonder whether or not there is some consideration that needs to be given to the social and psychological impact of creating a digital identity that does bear real world consequence. So, for example, in China, they've been test piloting a social system where you get credits based on your interaction with society. And this creates a digital identity whereby these credits are attached to your digital identity. And if you are not scoring well enough, you are going to be refused access to certain types of services. You can't use, transportation or whatever the thing is.
So it's like an Uber rating, but on a mass scale.
It's more than that.
And it can affect your credit rating and abilities.
It can affect whether you can be employed and all sorts of other things. But this is a pilot that they're looking to roll out, in a broader scale. But I find this very interesting in as much as there is this danger when you talk about introducing this as a real world implication based on your performance within a digital environment and your digital identity's performance. What kind of impact that's going to have. And I'm curious from your perspective, Luke, what do you think could be some of the consequences that we see?
I'm just taking all that in. That's incredibly interesting. It's sort of black. It's black book stuff, this, isn't it?
Black Mirror.
Black Mirror. Black books is still around. That's right. Now, the key word that for me is accountability. I think back to playing Call of Duty at university, and you're getting abuse from somebody in a headset across. It could be anyone. It could be your dad. Could be an 8-year-old. As soon as that level of accountability is what you were touching on, it's affecting your credit score or all that goes with that. Then suddenly people will be very different how they present themselves. It's like the early days of AOL chat rooms where you could go in and be as abusive as anything. Esports is seeing that to a degree. It's what it basically Twitch are talking around. How do we actually police that?
Yeah.
And interestingly now, it's made me think, you've got your NBA 2K League, the MLS, all your big sports are now looking, McLaren in the moment, are looking at how we take real or traditional sport and e-sport and merge it, it's going to happen more and more and more, but accountability is probably key. So having a digital identity is probably that underpinning link, isn't it? But the actual answer, I don't know anymore. I'm asking myself questions now. What was the question?
I think that's a really good point, and I think we can see like Twitch, I think, is at the absolute forefront of people who are trying to solve the problem of how to reintroduce the kind of social covenant that governs normal interactions so that there are consequences to digital interactions so that people are capable of policing themselves. It's not like we aren't constantly screaming abuse at each other because it's illegal.
And yet, you say this, and yet, if you actually go and look at the general proportion of Twitch stream chatter, let's be honest, 90% of that is just blatant abuse.
It's still it's a problem that's in progress. That's why they're at the forefront of it. But I think we should. It's important to recognise that I think we're talking about two different things in the sense that you were talking about destruction or theft of digital identity, or it being marred in some way and this causing actual hurt to people in the real world.
Yes,
which is an idea that should not be unfamiliar to us. But I think it's important to say that if it's an identity that you have built and expressed, and it's part of your identity, and you feel harmed or violated when it's taken from you, that is always going to be a really serious and tragic thing that we should take very, very seriously. But I also think that that is different to a different situation where this is what we're talking about as competition, and where a game or a digital environment has set up an atmosphere of competition in which someone can fail or succeed or perceive that they are failing or succeeding, which could be EVE Online, where the loss of your assets could result in a loss of investment of time and a loss of competitive status. But it could also be Facebook, a social environment which is competitive simply because of the way it presents our own social interactions. So you can lose Facebook, and that is tragic. But maybe it shouldn't be presented in a way that makes us feel that way, because life is competitive enough.
But then that's an interesting point that brings us to a natural, organic question here, which is it necessarily a good thing or a relevant thing to include elements of gamification or game when it comes to the way that you structure digital identity? So, for example, the way that this Chinese, prototype has been rolled out, making it a competition amongst people to perform better than somebody else, instead of just encouraging the individual to do good, is it necessarily a good thing that people are continually using this horrible term of gamification and borrowing game design concepts to force competitiveness, to force a degree of one-upmanship that perhaps shouldn't be present in social media and in digital identity as a whole? Because even if we look at the way that people currently are forced to interact with, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or eBay or Amazon, whether they understand it or not, they are being gamified.
I'm just thinking out loud on a sort of follow-on from that. If we have this digital identity, like the example you referenced in China, then at what point you almost become a digital product in yourself, there's digital currency around that. You think about like your Instagram, the whole birth of influencer marketing.
Yeah.
So, but as soon as you have influencers, it loses part of its authenticity because it is leading towards something. So the digital identities are evolving, but people know it. So people tweet how they want to be perceived. They gain the escape, which is the first point. If that becomes a product in itself, do the digital, they become what we create them to be, rather than what they actually are. So actually, trolling and being abusive is not who they are, but it's
what they're engineered to do.
Yeah.
And in the same way, it's interesting that, if you look at the average behaviour of a 12-year-old versus the average behaviour of, say, a 15 or 16-year-old, they understand the key differences in how to articulate themselves and to kind of create a bias towards the narrative that they are sharing about themselves. They understand how to project their best Instagram self or their best Facebook self. That's why you always have the sunny, beautiful holiday pictures or whatever the thing is. By the age of 12, they already understand this.
Yes.
And so it's something that, to a certain degree, we're already hard-coding this into a generation.
But you can't describe a change of that scale just in terms of one aspect of the change. Like, I absolutely agree. But I think those same people that we're talking about who have a new appreciation, a priority on the way that they present themselves, even an artifice in the way that they present themselves in a way that seems strange to us because they're native to that generation. Equally, those people, you could argue, will probably have a different perspective on the way other people present themselves and are less willing to take it as read because they assume that everybody is presenting themselves.
Exactly.
It's a very typical thing that, you know, even 10 years ago, you couldn't bring a load of strangers onto a reality TV show and expect them to know how to behave. But now, everybody who goes on a reality TV show, everybody knows roughly how to present themselves. They pick people who are good at this sort of thing, but everybody knows roughly what is expected of a reality show, because I think we're all much more used to the idea that you create and present a way of being, and then you decide how it's going to pan out, and you get to control that to a certain extent.
Oh, just thinking then, you know, think about social media trends. So think back to say hot dogs or legs. Do you remember that one? It was hot dogs or my legs.
Yeah.
To explain it.
Yeah.
What happens in your merged reality augmented piece, you know, the Pokemon Go? What happens when people start taking sort of social media, in Facebook, Instagram trends and building it into this sort of digital reality trend? Is that the next?
Well, I think that brings us around to kind of like where we end up with this, because both all of the online tools that we're talking about enable behaviors that can be healthy or they can be unhealthy, and they accelerate them either way. Because fan behaviors, fan practices, people wanting to be together in groups, people wanting to find like-minded people and not compete, but actually join and be tribal and brand themselves with something that they are a fan of, whether it's sports or pro wrestling.
Example, isn't it?
Or you know, or a movie franchise, whatever it is. We're also talking about tools that bring those people together. So when you participate in hot dogs or legs, you're both competing and you're being part of something. And I think we need to understand that both of those are happening. But we are entering a space where I think it is a distinct possibility that this kind of online social Wild West, semi-competitive, semi-supportive environment that we see online all the time is going to start having an existence in reality, simply because we're going to start playing games that use reality as their canvas, just like Pokemon Go does, just like the upcoming Harry Potter Niantic property will, and all the other Ingress copycats that are going to be coming out over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
There's a great example. There's a company based in LA, I believe, called the Fan Controlled Football League.
Right.
And it's essentially, you take the indoor American football, which is like five-a-side or the equivalent, and they've mixed it with Madden. So they're now having it so people are voting on the kits, on the team selection, on the various plays they're making. It's underset by sort of blockchain, Ethereum, smart contracts. So it's all happening in real time. So it's almost this futuristic point where you are actually controlling where Tom Brady throws a ball.
Right.
But you're saying futuristic, but in non-sports arenas, this is not dissimilar to the behaviours of crowdfunding and crowdsourcing in terms of giving the audience a say in the outcomes.
Except that I think there's a spectrum in terms of what audiences want from that experience. Because to me, I think it might succeed, it might be amazing for a certain type of audience, but not for everybody who currently consumes football. This is not like an additional feature that everybody wants and is simply not available. It's a type of interface with that sport. Because what we're talking about still, to me, kind of smacks a little bit of a football league going, oh, you guys think it's so easy? You do it.
Well, this is my point. You look back a couple of weeks ago and the on-pitch protests at West Ham.
Right.
And you're then thinking, right, let's say we've given the keys to all the fans. You vote, the maximum vote will be who we pick play up front. If he's useless, well, you guys did it. At that point, with that group, then appoint their own person to make decisions for them.
Yeah.
Which has gone full circle and back round, but this one.
Yeah. But I said this earlier on today, there's a difference between a fan and a loyalist. A fan is somebody who sticks with something while talking about all the things that they hate about it, but they hate it better and in a more informed way than people who are non-fans. You can be a fan and have real problems with the franchise, and it's your ownership, your sense of participation in the franchise that causes you to protest on the pitch, to feel such offence and to feel that you want to have your feelings heard.
But when also the franchise, you have a sense of ownership within
exactly.
it as well.
But when everything is built around that voting, it's going to be really cool as an interaction. It's sort of fantasy football, but you get to see them actually play. But it's also sort of Twitch plays Pokemon, where everybody is responsible and nobody's responsible. And how are fans going to complain, which is part of the process of fan practice? What are they going to say in the pub about decisions that they don't agree with?
When it's all their fault.
Because it's just like complaining about a government that got voted in democratically, but that you don't agree with. There is a limit to how much you can complain, and that's why we don't have fans of politics. We have participants.
Okay, so as always, we like to ask the big question. And I'm going to ask what it is you think needs to change, be that something that's technological or cultural, that is going to shift the way that people are thinking about digital identities.
I was going to ask you that question. I think it's really interesting. So we spoke to Google earlier. We said what's happening from a daydream point of view. And there wasn't really a direct answer. They've got their ducks in a row and they can move accordingly. You said it earlier. It's going to be this next generation that we think we are tech savvy. It's the generations we're influencing when they're 7 years old and are gaming in immersive ways that we don't know. They will push this forward, and it'll be the big techs that will be waiting for it to have that movement ready to follow suit, I think.
I think you're right. Yeah, and I think just to follow on from that, I mean, I think practically like proper seamless visual digital layers in AR are going to be a huge paradigm shift. But I think the change that I would like to see happen that would make the biggest difference, and especially in light of headlines that we're seeing now in April 2018, if you're listening from the archives, it's the fact that, I can't remember exactly who I'm quoting here, but you shouldn't have to have an advanced legal degree to understand something that everybody signs up to, and it's a tool that everybody uses, and it's more or less expected in
Are you talking
normal
about
life.
the pink-haired young man?
Yeah, right. So we shouldn't be signing things that we don't understand. We shouldn't be expected to sign things that we don't understand, which can take rights away from us in ways that we understand are dangerous.
And yet everybody does.
Especially as those things start impinging on the real world, even if it's just your Pokemon Go life, which has a dimension in the real world. If you're going to be competing all the time or building an identity all the time, and it matters to you, not just when you're sitting in front of your game machine, but when you're walking down the street, we have to be very careful about how you pay for it, whether you pay for it with your personal data, how that's going to be used, and what you knew you were signing up for, because we're starting to talk about people's real identities.
Okay, well, as always, we like to give our listeners a way to find out a little bit more about you, and we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be?
Yeah, that's very kind. So we are event-based, and network is physical, but on social media, our identity is at sportsinnovnet, and that's SPORTSINNOVNET.
Wonderful, thank you.
So I'm about this later on Twitter, as in we'll talk about this later, about this later with 3 T's, and that's the best place to find me.
Wonderful. Well, as always, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. digitaljamsessions.com